Hi, our names are Laura and Jonas, and a bit over a year ago we moved to the Estonian island Saaremaa. We bought a piece of land in the forest in a tiny village close to the Baltic Sea. The land is beautiful, with some deciduous forests, some pine forest and some very old oak trees. There is a bit of an open space in the middle, with a diverse meadow. There was an old wooden shed already on the land and a tiny summer cabin made with traditional logs. We call our land in the forest the land of slow living, Viibemaa. As we now have passed our first year mark, it's time for an overview of our project so far. The first thing we did when we arrived was setting up a part of our off-grid solar system, so we could use some building tools and have some lights. We cleaned out our old well and installed the water pump, so now we could filter the water for drinking and cooking. Then the first building started. As there were no sanitary facilities, we urgently needed a compost toilet. We felled some trees, prepared the logs and made the walls with a wattle and daub technique. We didn't bother making a door for now, and still to this day there is none. As winter was quickly approaching, we hurried to make the little summer cabin into a temporary, cozy and livable space. On some spots the wind just blew inside through some holes and gaps in the old walls. We put reed boards on the inside and outside and finished it with a clay plaster. Replacing and insulating the roof was for some time in future. We put some layers of tapestry on the floor and installed a small wood burner. The space is quickly heated but loses its warmth rather quickly, depending on the weather. On the outside we created an improvisorial outside kitchen on the small terrace. I love cooking outside, but with the days getting colder and colder, the wind and cold brought along its challenges. Whilst the nature and landscapes around us felt in a deep winter sleep, we started felling some trees, opening up more light on the open meadow. We harvested logs for our building projects and started collecting firewood that we can use in 2 years' time or so. We needed to put our solar batteries on a more frost-safe space before the depth of winter, so Jonas built a small cabin that would serve as a little technical room later in our house. We insulated it thickly with rock wool and reed boards. I set up a big compost heap for using in the long term in the garden. As we have food production high in our priorities, I started the first garden beds, filled with rotting debris that was laying around the land, old logs, planks and branches. I covered it all with soil and seaweed mulch and let it rest over the winter. The earth came out of the hole I started digging that hopefully one day will be turned into a beautiful pond, but that's still far away for now. Whilst we got a first dusting of snow in late autumn, I was still trying to plaster inside. I managed to do one layer, but the second finishing layer had to wait until next year. And then a real Nordic winter came in. We got many snow, fresh layers every day, weighing down heavily on the trees and the structures. It was stunningly beautiful though, and very refreshing in contrast with the dark greyness of late autumn. The nights were so silent and filled with bright stars. Even in wintertime we mainly used the outside kitchen, as inside there simply was no space. I made woodcuts during wintertime and planned out our projects for springtime. Whilst the snow was on the landscape in a thick blanket, there was not much we could do outside. So when the snow slowly melted, we could finally start on our first spring project. A small greenhouse for setting up seedling production and practice some woodworking skills before we try to build our house. The walls again with wattle and daub, made with splitted hazel branches and finished with an earthen plaster. In April the first 3 logs went in the ground, the start of our house. We searched for the tallest tree we could handle on our land that could serve as our top beam to connect the wall structure, and it worked. The first no-dig garden beds appeared in the landscape. Besides the earth that came out of the pit for the pond, I used compost and a seaweed mulch. The first tomatoes and peppers were planted in the small greenhouse. In May, the parents of Jonas came to help us out, constructing the house and helping in the garden. We planted 6 fruit trees in the landscape. And the first tiny plants were now in the ground. In June we got our first animals, Livonian chickens. I made a coop for them in a cordwood technique, stacked stumps of wood with cob in between. In front of the small seedling greenhouse will be our future herb garden, close to the kitchen. But for now I wanted to try a new gardening method, called the Midleider method. I planted cabbages and broccolis in the boxes. The summer garden was such a joy, plenty of vegetables and herbs for us to consume, and I was still adding more garden beds during the summer months. I hope to grow also a part of our chicken feeds and more potatoes next year. I also invited plenty of flowers into the garden, as they bring so much more charm and aliveness to the place. The wood chip pathways I had created in autumn already needed a new layer in summertime, but they create an inviting surface to walk on and bring interest to the landscape. In the summer we had a long building pause, as Jonas had some serious health struggles caused by encephalitis. He spent 10 days in hospital and was ill with all kinds of symptoms for 1.5 months. Afterwards, he slowly recovered. Luckily, his parents had planned to come help us out again in the end of August, and things moved forward from that point. After the wooden floor of the house was finished and the foundation for the stove ready, it was finally time for building up the walls. Very exciting. We had to think out how we could do this, and Jonas and his dad figured it out together. At the back of the garden I worked for what felt ages on the fencing for the chickens. I dug trenches everywhere and prepared all the logs necessary. The new chicken coop needed some final touches, with an automatic sliding door added. In September, 2 new chickens were added to the flock, and the 5 ladies and the gentlemen seemed to like their mud castle. Meanwhile, we're currently working on the walls of our house, building them up, trimming and plastering them. More on that in the next video. If you're also curious to know how our project will further evolve, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and help us grow. Feel free to share this video with family and friends so we can reach more people. Best wishes to you all, and thank you very much for watching.